D.B. Cooper hijacking. On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, a man boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305 in Portland, Oregon, bound for Seattle. He gave his name as Dan Cooper, later misreported as D.B. Cooper, and took seat 18C in the rear of the Boeing 727. Dressed in a dark suit, white shirt, and narrow black tie, Cooper looked like an ordinary businessman. But shortly after takeoff, he handed a flight attendant a note. At first, she thought it was just a flirtation, until he leaned in and said, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." What followed was one of the boldest acts of air piracy in American history. Cooper demanded $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck ready in Seattle. Authorities complied. When the plane landed, Cooper released the 36 passengers in exchange for the money and gear. Then, under the cover of darkness and heavy rain, the plane took off again with only Cooper, the crew, and his ransom aboard. Somewhere over the rugged wilderness of southwestern Washington, likely near the Lewis River, he lowered the rear air stair and leapt into the night with the cash strapped to him. No distress signal, no body, no trace. The FBI launched what would become the longest-running investigation in its history, codenamed Norjack. They interviewed thousands, pursued hundreds of suspects, and searched vast swaths of forest, but D.B. Cooper was never found. In 1980, a boy discovered $5,800 in decomposed bills matching the ransom along the Columbia River, sparking new theories but offering no answers. Was Cooper an experienced paratrooper who escaped clean? Or did he vanish into the wilderness, his body never recovered? In 2016, after 45 years of dead ends, the FBI officially closed the case. To this day, the true identity and fate of D.B. Cooper remains one of America's most captivating unsolved mysteries: Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. On July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa, once one of the most powerful labor leaders in America, vanished without a trace. The former president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters was last seen outside the Machus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, a suburb of Detroit, Michigan. He had told family he was meeting 2 men, Anthony Giacalone, a feared Detroit mobster, and Anthony Provenzano, a Teamsters official with deep mafia ties. Neither man admitted to meeting Hoffa that day. By 2:45 p.m., Hoffa was gone. His car was later found abandoned in the restaurant's parking lot. No witnesses, no struggle, no blood, just silence. Hoffa had enemies in both labor and organized crime circles. He had been released from prison in 1971 after serving time for jury tampering and fraud, but President Nixon's clemency barred him from union activity until 1980. Hoffa was trying to claw his way back into the Teamsters leadership, and that, many believe, sealed his fate. The FBI launched an aggressive investigation. They tapped phones, interrogated mobsters, and followed countless leads, some credible, many absurd. Suspects included the mafia's 5 families, corrupt union officials, and even close allies. Over the decades, rumors spread widely. Hoffa was buried under Giant Stadium. Hoffa dissolved in acid. Hoffa was entombed in a steel drum beneath Detroit. But no theory brought closure, no body, no arrests, no concrete evidence. In 1979, the FBI officially closed the case, labeling it unsolved. Hoffa was declared legally dead in 1982. Yet even now, nearly 5 decades later, the mystery haunts America's criminal underworld. How can a man so high-profile simply vanish in broad daylight? The Tylenol murders. In the fall of 1982, a quiet panic swept through the suburbs of Chicago. Between September 29th and October 1st, 7 people, ranging from a 12-year-old girl to young adults and parents, collapsed and died shortly after taking extra-strength Tylenol. The deaths seemed unrelated, until investigators discovered the link. Every victim had swallowed capsules laced with potassium cyanide. Within hours, fear spread nationwide. The first to die was Mary Kellerman, just 12 years old, in Elk Grove Village. Hours later, 27-year-old postal worker Adam Janus collapsed in his Arlington Heights home. His brother and sister-in-law, grieving and unaware, took Tylenol from the same bottle while gathered at his house, and both died shortly after. 4 more deaths followed, all traced to poison Tylenol purchased off retail shelves across the Chicago area. The randomness, the speed, and the brutality of the act stunned the nation. What began as a series of mysterious deaths turned into a full-scale manhunt. Authorities pulled over 31 million Tylenol bottles from store shelves. Johnson & Johnson, the manufacturer, issued a nationwide recall, costing more than $100 million. The incident would eventually spark sweeping changes in drug packaging, including tamper-evident seals, measures we now take for granted. But for all the urgency, the FBI, local police, and federal investigators never found the killer. Suspicion briefly landed on a man named James William Lewis, who sent a ransom letter to Johnson & Johnson demanding $1 million to stop the killings. He was convicted of extortion in 1983, but never charged with murder. Despite revisiting the case multiple times over the decades, including as recently as 2010, no one has ever been arrested or tried for the 7 murders. The Tylenol murders remain one of the FBI's most haunting unsolved cases. The Black Dahlia murder. In January 1947, Los Angeles was gripped by a discovery so horrifying it would echo through true crime history. 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, later dubbed the Black Dahlia, was found brutally murdered in a vacant lot near Leimert Park. Her body had been severed at the waist, drained of blood, and meticulously posed. The date was January 15th, and the quiet neighborhood would never forget what it woke up to that morning. Elizabeth, an aspiring actress from Massachusetts, had come to California chasing stardom. Instead, she became the victim of one of the most gruesome and perplexing homicides the city had ever seen. The mutilation was surgical, clean cuts, no blood at the scene, suggesting a perpetrator with anatomical knowledge. Her face had been slashed from ear to ear in a Glasgow smile. Yet, there were no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, and no known witnesses to the crime. The LAPD launched an immediate and massive investigation with assistance from the FBI. Agents ran her fingerprints through the new automated fingerprint identification system, one of the first times it was used in a homicide. Background checks were pulled, associates questioned, and the media frenzy only fueled public hysteria. Dozens of men were interrogated. Over 60 people confessed to the killing, but none could be definitively tied to the evidence. The case quickly turned cold. Suspects ranged from physicians to drifters, but the lack of forensic technology and the contamination of the crime scene hampered progress. One name, Dr. George Hodel, later surfaced as a prime suspect. His own son, a former LAPD detective, would decades later accuse him in a best-selling book. But no charges were ever brought, and the LAPD never formally closed the case. To this day, the Black Dahlia murder remains unsolved, haunting Los Angeles with its mystery, its brutality, and its silence. Who killed Elizabeth Short, and why? The answers may have been buried with her. The Zodiac Killer. Between 1968 and 1969, Northern California became the hunting ground of one of the most elusive killers in American history, the Zodiac Killer. Striking in areas around Vallejo, San Francisco, and Napa County, the unidentified murderer claimed responsibility for at least 5 confirmed killings, though he boasted in letters of taking as many as 37 lives. His first known attack occurred on December 20, 1968, when high school students Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were gunned down near Lake Herman Road. Just 7 months later, on July 4, 1969, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau were ambushed in a parked car. Mageau survived to describe the attacker. But what made this case infamous wasn't just the killings, it was the killer's chilling game with law enforcement and the media. Beginning in August 1969, the Zodiac sent handwritten letters to newspapers, each containing cryptic ciphers, taunts, and disturbing details only the killer could know. One cipher, known as the Z340, remained unsolved for over 50 years until amateur codebreakers cracked it in 2020. Yet it revealed no name, only more riddles. The killer continued communicating sporadically into the 1970s, once sending a Halloween card to a journalist with a threat of future violence. The letters often signed off with a symbol, a circle with a cross through it, and the chilling words, "This is the Zodiac speaking." The FBI and local police agencies launched extensive investigations, interviewing hundreds of suspects and cross-referencing handwriting, fingerprints, and even DNA. One suspect, Arthur Lee Allen, drew significant attention but was never charged. DNA extracted from envelopes decades later proved inconclusive. Despite modern forensic advancements, the Zodiac killer's identity remains unknown. More than half a century later, the case is still open. The Gardner Museum heist. On the early morning of March 18, 1990, in Boston, Massachusetts, one of the most audacious art thefts in history unfolded inside the stately halls of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Just after 1:20 a.m., two men disguised as Boston police officers rang the museum's side entrance, claiming to be responding to a disturbance. Against protocol, the security guards let them in. Within minutes, the imposters overpowered and handcuffed the guards, leading them to the museum's basement, where they were bound for hours. What followed was a calculated and surreal heist that stunned the art world. For 81 minutes, the thieves moved with eerie precision. They bypassed motion sensors, avoided cameras, and selectively removed 13 priceless artworks, including Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, Vermeer's The Concert, and works by Degas and Manet. The estimated value? Over $500 million. No fatalities occurred that night, but the cultural loss was immeasurable. The museum's empty frames still hang in place today, a haunting tribute to what was taken. The FBI quickly took charge of the case, suspecting ties to organized crime. Over the decades, agents chased leads from Boston's underworld to Europe's black markets. A 2013 statement suggested they'd identified the perpetrators, now deceased, but the art had vanished. Despite millions in reward money, global media attention, and undercover operations, not a single piece has been recovered. To this day, the Gardner Museum heist remains the largest unsolved art theft in history. The Long Island serial killer. In December 2010, the quiet coastal stretch of Ocean Parkway on Long Island, New York, became the epicenter of a chilling mystery. What began as a routine search for a missing woman turned into a haunting discovery. The skeletal remains of 4 young women, each wrapped in burlap and placed mere feet from each other in the dense underbrush near Gilgo Beach. Authorities feared the worst. This wasn't random. It was the work of a serial killer. Over the following months, more bodies surfaced. By 2011, the remains of at least 11 individuals had been found, some dismembered, others long decomposed, and several still unidentified. The victims were mostly women, many of whom had worked as online escorts. But among them was a toddler and a man. Details that didn't fit any clear pattern. The FBI, Suffolk County Police, and state investigators launched an intensive multi-agency investigation. Digital breadcrumbs were followed, cell tower data scoured, and hundreds of tips chased. Yet for years, the case remained frozen in uncertainty. Then in July 2023, a seismic shift. Rex Heuermann, a Manhattan architect living just miles from the crime scenes in Massapequa Park, was arrested and charged with the murders of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, 3 of the original Gilgo 4. Prosecutors alleged he used burner phones and fake email accounts, stalking his victims methodically. But even with this breakthrough, the broader case remains open. Multiple victims, particularly those found further east, are not linked to Heuermann, and no charges have been filed in their deaths. More than a decade since the first discovery, the Long Island serial killer case remains partly unsolved. The FBI continues to examine whether multiple killers were involved, and if justice for the remaining victims is still within reach. The killing of Amber Hagerman. On January 13, 1996, in the quiet city of Arlington, Texas, 9-year-old Amber Hagerman set out on a short bike ride with her little brother. The sun was just beginning to dip when Amber pedaled alone into an abandoned grocery store parking lot, a place they weren't supposed to go. Moments later, a neighbor heard a scream. A dark pickup truck was seen speeding away, with Amber inside. It was broad daylight, and yet within seconds, she had vanished. For 4 agonizing days, search teams, local police, and the FBI scoured the area. Helicopters flew overhead, flyers were posted across the state, and news coverage flooded every channel. But hope would be shattered on January 17th, when a man walking his dog discovered Amber's body in a creek behind an apartment complex just 4 miles from where she was taken. She had been kept alive for at least 2 days. Her throat had been cut. The community was devastated. Investigators chased hundreds of leads, questioned sex offenders, and even consulted criminal profilers. But despite the urgency, the witness account, and federal assistance, Amber's killer was never found. No arrest, no charges, just silence. Yet out of that tragedy, something powerful was born. Inspired by Amber's story, her family and lawmakers pushed for a system that could warn the public when a child goes missing. It became known as the AMBER Alert, a legacy of vigilance in her name. Nearly 3 decades later, the system has saved over 1,000 children. But the case that started it all remains painfully open. Maura Murray disappearance. Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, vanished on the evening of February 9, 2004. Her Saturn sedan crashed into a snowbank along Route 112 in the remote town of Haverhill, New Hampshire. A bus driver passing by offered help, but Maura declined, claiming she'd already called roadside assistance, though no such call was ever made. By the time police arrived minutes later, she was gone. Her car was locked. Her belongings, including school books and alcohol, were still inside. There were no footprints in the snow leading away from the scene, and Maura Murray had disappeared without a trace. What led her there remains one of the most confounding parts of the case. Just days earlier, she'd emailed professors claiming there was a family emergency. There wasn't. She had packed up her dorm, withdrawn cash from her bank account, and printed out MapQuest directions to Burlington, Vermont. But why? No one knows. That drive north would be her last known journey. Despite immediate local searches and eventually FBI involvement, the investigation produced few answers. Cadaver dogs, helicopters, thermal imaging, and ground teams scoured the surrounding woods. Multiple theories emerged. Was she fleeing something? Meeting someone? Did she succumb to the freezing wilderness or fall victim to foul play? Over the years, there have been tips, dead ends, and even digs at suspicious properties, but nothing has ever definitively surfaced. Over 20 years later, Maura's case has only grown in notoriety. Online communities obsess over theories, comb satellite images, and dissect every known detail. But her disappearance remains unsolved. The Setagaya family murders. In the quiet Tokyo suburb of Setagaya, Japan, December 30th, 2000 began like any other winter evening. But by dawn, an entire family, Father Mikio Miyazawa, Mother Yasuko, and their 2 young children, 8-year-old Niina and 6-year-old Rei, were dead. Their home, nestled near a park in a seemingly safe neighborhood, became the scene of one of Japan's most haunting unsolved crimes. What began as a brutal home invasion soon spiraled into a mystery that baffled investigators and drew in the FBI, but never delivered answers. The killer struck sometime between late evening and early morning, first strangling young Rei in his second-floor bedroom. Mikio was attacked next, stabbed repeatedly with a sashimi knife until he collapsed near the staircase. Yasuko and Niina attempted to flee, but were cornered and stabbed to death upstairs. The sheer savagery shocked even seasoned detectives. Yet what came next was even more disturbing. After the murders, the killer stayed inside the house for hours. He ate ice cream from the fridge, used the family's computer, took a nap on the couch, and even used their toilet without flushing. He left behind fingerprints, clothing, and even feces. Yet he vanished without a trace. Tokyo Metropolitan Police launched an investigation that spanned decades. Over 280,000 officers were mobilized. The killer's DNA suggested mixed East Asian ancestry, possibly Korean or Southern European. Items he left behind, including a sweater and a knife, were traced to stores in Japan and even one in the US. The FBI was consulted, offering psychological profiling and forensic analysis. But despite thousands of tips and nearly 20 years of effort, no suspect has ever been identified. The case remains open, evidence frozen in time, waiting for a match that never comes. The West Mesa Murders. In February 2009, a grim discovery on the West Mesa of Albuquerque, New Mexico, sent shockwaves across the nation. A woman walking her dog stumbled upon a human bone. What followed would unravel into one of the most disturbing unsolved serial murder cases in the American Southwest. Dubbed the West Mesa Bone Collector, this case would expose a hidden mass grave and a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. As investigators descended on the site near 118th Street Southwest, they unearthed the skeletal remains of 11 women and an unborn child. The victims, all young, most Hispanic, many involved in sex work or reported missing between 2001 and 2005, had vanished without a trace. The youngest was just 15. Over weeks, FBI teams and local authorities combed the desert, uncovering shallow graves stretching across the barren terrain. The method of disposal and the location suggested the work of a calculating killer, someone who knew the area and deliberately targeted marginalized women. Despite intense efforts, including a dedicated task force and over 200 interviews, the investigation stalled. Several potential suspects were floated, most notably Lorenzo Montoya, a local man with a violent history and ties to sex workers. But Montoya was killed in 2006 in a separate incident, years before the bones were found. His connection remained speculative. The FBI brought in profilers, analyzed satellite imagery to track land changes, and pursued countless leads, yet no arrests have ever been made. More than a decade later, the desert remains silent. 11 women lost. No killer named, no justice served. The West Mesa murders remain one of the most haunting unsolved cases in FBI history. Lauren Spearer, disappearance. Lauren Spearer was just 20 years old when she vanished without a trace on June 3, 2011, in Bloomington, Indiana. A fashion merchandising major at Indiana University, Lauren had spent the night out with friends, celebrating the start of summer break. But sometime after 4:30 a.m., while walking barefoot near the intersection of 11th Street and College Avenue, she disappeared. The last confirmed sighting showed her leaving a friend's apartment, intoxicated, unsteady, and alone. What followed was a frantic search. Lauren's parents arrived within 24 hours. Flyers blanketed the campus. Search parties combed wooded areas, lakes, and alleys. The FBI joined local and state police in what became one of the most high-profile missing persons investigations in Indiana's history. Surveillance footage, phone records, and witness statements were all scrutinized, but yielded few concrete answers. Several men who had been with Lauren that night were questioned, but none were charged. Theories ranged from accidental overdose to foul play. One former student claimed knowledge of Lauren's death years later, but no evidence surfaced to support it. Despite over a decade of tips, leads, and pleas from the Spearer family, no body has ever been found. No suspect has been officially named, and no charges have been filed. The case remains open, with the FBI still urging the public to come forward with information. If you enjoyed this, I'm going to be posting a lot more interesting videos here. I'd greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Thank you very much.